Welcome to Crossing Faiths. I'm John Pinna, and today I have a good friend and colleague, Momin Sheikh, who's going to talk to us a little bit about who he is and his faith journey, and from coming from Pakistan to, I guess, Philadelphia. And but as an American Muslim, first generation American Muslim, I felt compelled to invite him on. And we don't spend too much time speaking sort of casually, so it's always business or this or that or the other. So I appreciate you coming on board, Momin.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.
It's Philadelphia, it's so you must be an Eagles fan.
Huge. Yeah.
I mean, I here's the problem. And I know there's a lot of jokes before and after, but before I go, if the Eagles win, the city's going to be devastated. And if they lose, the city's going to be devastated. So was it bad?
No, it was great. Even after the Commanders game, everyone rushed Broad Street. Uh, After the Super Bowl, everyone rushes Broad Street. There's tens of thousands of people out. Everyone's in a great mood.
Right.
We're just rowdy as a people. But
Yeah,
it's
I've been to the link. I've been to a game at the link, and I was like, oh my God. I was like, this is like old school New York. It's not like that in New York anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, so long as you don't wear, the opposing team's jerseys, you're usually, in for a good time.
Right, yeah. You can't be anywhere near a color or shade or variant of the opposing team, right? So, all right, so did you make any money? Did you bet on the Eagles?
I didn't. I didn't. I usually, I've done prop bets, fun prop bets against friends in the past. What color the Gatorade is going to be, who scores the first touchdown. This year, I didn't.
Okay. Yeah, no,
Kept it,
I
but it
I
was
was based in Vegas for 10 years, so we were always there's everything you could bet on, so and it was kind of fun. But I figured being in Philly, I figured you got a bookie.
old school. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think most bookies have been put out of business by these apps that they have now, FanDuel and whatnot.
really? Yeah, I would imagine so. But I don't know. You guys are old school down there, so but I appreciate you taking the time. I thought maybe we'd maybe just take a step back and maybe tell us a little bit about your history. I mean, you were born in Pakistan and immigrated here. Where were you born?
I was born in Islamabad, the capital, and my family moved to California. So I was about 4 or 5 years old when we made the move.
And when you did you grow up? You grew up Muslim, like a pretty strict family, right? When you grew up.
I grew up very Pakistani Muslim,
Okay.
and eventually Muslim, but yeah, uh, very Pakistani Muslim.
How would you divvy that up, Pakistani Muslim? So because a lot of people don't understand the cultural components. There's like cultural Islam, right? Which there's a cultural component that bleeds into Islam that really isn't Islam, right? And then there's like hardcore Islam. So tell maybe you can unpack like some of the elements of growing up. I mean, did you salat out every day, 5 times a day, go to Juma
Yeah,
prayer?
I was very religious from a kid that maybe as a kid, I did the whole Sunday school thing. My parents were religious. 9/11 happened when I was, I guess, in middle school. So it was tougher. It was much tougher being Muslim growing up, where I grew up.
Yeah, middle
So
school, 9/11 happened. I know that, they were, I was when I was a lot of the Muslims, like it was tough because they were stoning the houses. I was in 9/11, after 9/11, they were stoning our house in Hyde Park here in New York. And and the cops would say they what did they say? They would say, "Oh, they're exercising their freedom of speech." Right? So they're stoning our house. And then the cops come, they stop, and everybody's kind of like disperses a little bit. And then we're sitting there and we're going, well, what do we do here? And I'm born, don't think it's wrong. I'm not saying anything about first generation American immigrants, but I was born here. Like I'm fourth generation African American. I'm like, what do you mean I can't get these guys from stoning my house? I was like, so here's the thing. They start stoning my house. Can I Second Amendment them? I'm gonna, can I start standing my ground? And the problem was you can't because you're Muslim. So if you stand your ground and defend your property, then you're a psycho. But if I wasn't Muslim, I would just be standing my ground. But yeah, I know what you mean. The family is a tough time during 9/11 if you were particularly younger and in school. So
I
you
found my parents found my mother started wearing a hijab after that. So she doubled down. She was like, "Listen, I'm going to be a proud Muslim. I'm going to be proud of who I am. Islam is a representation of peace for 99.9% of those who practice it, and
Right.
I'm not going to shudder and shy away from my religion." So that was pretty strong to see. And it was in when I was a teenager that I found Islam. I guess kind of on my own. My parents found it another version of it. I think we realized like, all right, cool. Like there's certain things we do that's really just Pakistani. It's not Islam. So then my
Right.
parents became more, I guess, purist Islamists. So I think there's a lot of Pakistani Americans or immigrants who can relate to, doing XYZ or ritualistic things that really don't apply to the religion. So I was fortunate enough my parents you know, didn't really have much of that on us. And when I was high school, going to college, I was just Muslim on my own, away from the house. And then in my early 20s, I worked for a Muslim guy. We would go, pray at the masjid during our lunch break. We would go after work to pray Maghrib sometimes. So I was very involved in the community. I was very Muslim, very involved with other young Muslims. There's a brotherhood that I really enjoyed when I was younger, being around other Muslims.
Yeah, it's nice to have that camaraderie, and then it's like we always say faith is theology, community, and identity. And you can have any one of those things floating around. But if you have more than one or all three, it helps out. So to have that identity and that community is really good, and then spend time delving into the theology and figuring out like your mother was saying that we're a religion of peace and need be outward. I mean, I can speak to that. That's why I wear the dopey. That's why my business is religion, right? I was all in business my first 10 years of my career, so so I never really kind of focused on the Muslim elements of my identity. It was always very private, but you're through so you spent time as a young man as sort of is spending time with the Muslim community. But how did it evolve into, your identity today?
I think religion should be more private than what it is today. In the sense, I think religion is the point of religion is spirituality. And this is just my interpretation of it. And I think my interpretation changes as you grow, as you learn. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Spirituality is your connection with your creator. Religion is how you get there, is how most people get there. And I think that fluctuates, right? Like how close you feel with God fluctuates, your spirituality fluctuates. And even religion, I think Islam is one of the tougher religions to practice if you do if you do what you're supposed to do, right? Judaism, Islam, some of the other major religions don't require you to pray 5 times a day, don't require you to learn an entire other language to fully understand what you're reading, don't have the Zabiha halal rules or what people follow, what people don't follow. So I think being a part of a community is tougher if you have my perspective like, hey man, I think you could be spiritual, I think you could have faith, and I think you could worship God and not necessarily go to the mosque or not necessarily pray 5 times a day or read the Quran or eat halal meat. And maybe when I was younger, I had a different interpretation where I was like, hey, this is something I'm going to do. As I get older and I still want that connection with God, I just don't know how important it is to do the ritualistic practices that and listen, if it gets people there, then by all means do it, right? If praying 5 times a day or going to the mosque gets you that spiritual fix, you should absolutely do it. I guess just where I'm at currently in life, I like to believe that if God is real, which I believe he is, or they are. uh, they'll judge you based on your actions and your intent, what you do with your life, how you live life, who you help, how you take care of your parents, the things that you're really taught in all religions, especially in Islam, not necessarily, hey man, did you wake up at 4:30 this morning and pray?
Right, right.
I
You know,
think that's where a lot of other religions have that. A lot of other religions, if you look at Christianity, Judaism, you can meet someone that says, "Hey, I'm Christian, but I go to the church once a year, twice a year, but I'm still Christian. I believe in God." And you can speak to a Jewish person. They say, "Hey, man, I go to the synagogue, for the high holidays, and I don't keep
sure.
kosher, and I don't follow, but I am very Jewish." I think Islam is just a little bit behind on that culturally. Maybe it'll take a generation or two because we're fairly new to Western culture, right?
Sure.
I wonder, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I wonder if there'll be a day where you'll meet more and more Muslims that identify as Muslims, that are culturally Muslims, that share the values of Islam, but don't practice many of the traditions. Don't necessarily pray 5 times a day or go to a mosque on Fridays or eat halal meat, similar to what, how other religions are practiced, but still very proudly identify yourself as Muslim. And I see more and more of that. Just, I I think there'll be a cultural shift towards that.
Yeah, no, I think that, you can be a cultural Christian or a cultural Jew, you can be a cultural Buddhist or something like that. You kind of where you kind of ebb and flow in and out of the faith. I think it's difficult in Islam because it's very prescriptive, right? So this is, religion's my business, not because I'm pious and not because I'm a great Muslim. I think I agree with you. There's good works, leaving the world a better place than you found it. Helping people, being good to your family, all these different things. And I lot out. I have a prayer room right down the way. With a funny little couch on the floor and all kinds of other stuff. But then again, all this stuff that I have in there is I'm Ishmaeli, so I have all this really esoteric stuff, which is all really blasphemous, right? So, it's one of those things where, as you know, the problem is that no two Muslims are the same. So if I go to the Mambarga and I go to with like some Jaffries, some Twelvers, they'll sit right away, they'll come up to me and say, "You're not praying right." Like right away, I'm done. And then they go, "No, this is how you do it." I go, "Well, you're new to Islam." I'm like, "I'm not new to Islam. It's your Islam. You understand?" And there's a lot of shenanigans like that you get really tired of real fast.
Yeah,
Um,
I
and so that
totally agree with
hazing,
that.
you know, is a big problem. And so like even still, like if I don't go, I have it's a Sunni mosque out. It's a African American Sunni mosque, right? So it's not it's a Nation of Islam, right? Is right down the road. So it's a different brand. There's a lot of social issues being flown around, a lot of stuff being thrown around about political unrest and social justice and all that other stuff, which is not normally part of of going to prayer, going to the mosque generally. Um, and so I'm a little uncomfortable walking in because they're slinging issues that I don't even want to have an opinion about right now. You know what I mean? So, I'm
That's
like, and so so I think that the problem is, or as challenges, I wrote an article about being a cultural Muslim. I'll send it to you.
oh,
I
I'd love
think,
to read it.
yeah, there's, it's difficult because when you grow up Muslim and you grow up in a specific, you think that you're not only unique, but you're also part of this larger whole, and it's homogeneous, and it's not. You find out as you grow up, it's not. And I found out that Ismailis are a small sect of Shias Islam who are like Islam after hours. So it's like this cool identity, you know,
Yeah,
but nobody, no, everybody's like thinks you're a jinn. I've been called a jinn. I've been called a sorcerer. I've been called all these different things. Because the Hashashin come from our sect. I've walked into government meetings in Jordan where the member of the royal family said, "Are you here to murder me?" Before, and I'm like, "What?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And so here I am talking with Prince Lassie, and he won't let me in the room because he thinks that I'm there to murder him. And I'm going,
that's funny.
"Yeah, right. Can you
Always
imagine?"
very fascinated with other sects of Islam. I think that's really cool. And there was a quote I read when I was younger that really helped me come to this. It was by Aristotle. It's quick. It is the mark of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting it. And I
Right.
really love that. And you meet people that share very different views than you. I had a family friend that was Amity. And I
Yeah,
don't
I'm a
know
D.
if you
Yeah.
know much about him, but
Yeah, when I was at the American Islamic Congress, I was my job to work with the Ummah, and they were part of the Ummah. So I defended a lot of their human rights in Pakistan and all over the place, UAE. But I know the community well.
yeah, it's terrible how they're treated. But meeting someone who's an intellect, who's really well read, who could who studied theology. I think at Princeton it was this gentleman I met, and then to hear him speak about it, I was like, it's so we're so dismissive of other people's sex. We're so like, hey man, that's you're doing it wrong. And then you meet someone who's like, hey man, here's all the evidence that I have that backs up the way we do it.
Right.
So I don't have to convert to that technology. I just always thought it was fascinating that faith in general is faith, right? I learned early on not to, and there's a lot of great literature, which is science and Islam or math and Islam, which I appreciate, but science is always changing, right? So you can't say, I have faith because I can prove God exists, or I have faith in Islam because I could prove that the Quran is the word of God. I don't think that should be our approach, right? You have faith, you take the leap of faith, and then you believe in it. So does everyone else, right? And there's enough room for interpretation where really educated people, really intellectual people can come to different conclusions about the same thing, right? We can both be
Yeah.
Muslims from and pray and worship differently, really for the same, doing the same thing at the end. And I think culturally sometimes we're really tough on each other, right? We critique
Yeah.
it. You see this, I mean, you see in straight violence in other countries of like, hey, you're Shia, I'm Sunni, you're Ahmadi, you have to die. I think that's an
Right.
extreme. We do see it. I think it's beautiful to say, hey, we're both Muslim or we're both believe in God. You do it a little bit differently than I do.
Yeah.
I think that's totally fine. I actually think it's fascinating. I love learning about how other people do it. I've always been fascinated with Sufism. Uh,
Yeah.
I think the whole dance, sing, hum along thing, I think that's really fascinating.
It's cool, well, it was funny because when a lot of people turn around, they go, it's you can because you can be Sunni or Shia and be a Sufi, which is, and celebrate through dance or song and it's now becoming something interesting where a lot of people like want to show moderation or show difference by saying, oh well, I'm more Sufi than I am anything else, you know, and so it's funny because it sometimes means something with Islam, or something just means that they're just kind of like the same thing of saying, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And it's starting to become that, I think, in Islam. Because if I turn and say, how are you Sufi? And then how are you going to do the math on that? Because Sufis wear a particular type of clothes. They wear, they wear, they're kind of like the hippies of Islam. So they wear, like hemp and clothes made out of natural fibers. Then they have a very specific sort of ritual, which is dance and song. And it kind of goes down the road. And the Nuran sisters. The Nuran sisters, right? You just know them. They're a Punjabi Shia, and they sing, some pretty famous songs. I think they're broken up now. I think they, decided to
Oh,
get
are they?
married. Yeah, yeah, but the Noran sisters, like they're Sufis. They sing about Ali, which is completely blasphemous, right? Everybody freaks out. It says this sort of, and I'm going, come on, come on. Like, first of all, number one, it shows that I think it's the threshold of when prayer becomes song, that little, and that when that prayer becomes song and there's music associated with it, because most of the stuff they do is all, I don't know what the term is, but it's all harmony when they're just doing it with their voice. Um,
So
but
I love it's called Kavali.
yeah,
I've always loved Kavali. And my mother hates listening to it, and she cites blasphemy. I think you're often these singers 50, 60 years ago, and I guess some people are still re singing those songs or creating their own.
yeah,
Often create often compare the love you have for a lover with the love you have for God. And it kind of just, the lyrics just kind of intertwine.
Yeah.
Again, I think Mark of an educated mind to entertain an idea. I think you can still be entertained by a song, appreciate the song, acknowledge that it's good and it's catchy, and maybe it reminds you of God without it necessarily being blasphemous.
Yeah, I think that, it's troublesome because, how come, I so there's members of my family who will say we can't listen to music, you can't do this, you can't do that. And so you're sitting there going, so the next question is, well, why? And then it becomes like idolatry, or there comes this, and I'm going, it's not really. I go, here's the thing: we have such a diverse population that really delves into this stuff, and so just like I said, it's fine for me, but I have members of the family who are sort of second, third, or fourth out there, and they're hardcore Shia, 12ers, and they're saying, you can't have any music, you can't do any of that stuff. And if like, I have some 12er friends, 12er members of the family who Muharram is 60 days.
Man,
So so yeah, that's 60 days of fasting, 60 days of wearing black, 60 days of mourning, crying every single day. The 12ers are like the Catholics of Islam. They love their saints and they love crying.
actually.
Yeah, yeah, they love crying. So they love martyrdom. And so and then you have Ramadan, which is 30 days. So for 90 days of the year, not counting off-brand holidays, right? 90 days of the year, you're mourning. It's a lot.
That's
you
a
know
lot.
it's a lot. So Muharram is usually 3 to 12 days depending on who you are, right? So I was like 60 days. I was like, what do you so you're telling me you're not driving unless you have to, you're not watching TV, you're not listening to music, and what's the threshold? See, this is the thing. If I say you don't like music but you watch TV, what's the difference? you know no one's doing the math on stuff like that. And so, as people that are in the West, you get a lot of these imams that are overseas, and they're telling people, ask them, is this haram? Should I do this? Should I do that? They're sitting in the UAE. They're sitting in Pakistan. They get the call to, they get azan. They get all that stuff. We don't get that here. How are we gonna, so that they don't understand that balance.
I'm really curious what the face of Islam would look like in America in a generation or two. Because I think religion globally is falling, right? Less and less people are religious. It's not my opinion, it's
Right.
fact. And I believe a part of it is because we live in like a fact check type environment, right? If you look at a kid, everyone has a cell phone. You can't bullshit anyone anymore, right? There's nothing you could tell someone that they can't pick up their cell phone, Google in 2 seconds, and tell you whether it's right or wrong or
Right.
resources. So religion, the way it's traditionally been taught, or at least the way I've seen it been taught, is do this, and this is the way it has to be. This is the
Practice
way
the
I'm telling you
fundamentals.
it
Pray
is.
5 times a day. Do your zakat.
Yeah,
And you're good. It doesn't mean you're a good Muslim in the sense that you're performing good works, taking care of your family. I know a
that's
lot of
where
people that do that who are
I really
bastards.
liked my parents. Yeah, I give them credit. They focused on being a good person. They focused on manners. They focused a lot on Islam. I had to go to Sunday school. I had to pray, but they focused a lot on charity, being decent for the sake of Islam, and that's something that still sticks with me. So I'm grateful for that, and I think if you teach Islam that way to kids, to younger generations, the importance of being good, the importance of practicing what you're praying as opposed to praying 5 times a day in a language you actually didn't learn. Um, I think that makes you a better person. I think that makes you a better Muslim. If you can be charitable and kind and pious and righteous and take care of your parents and take care of the people around you in the name of Islam, I think that person, I think that version of Islam will be much more sustainable long term for this generation and the generations that are coming afterwards.
No, I agree with you. I think it's very, very difficult because we're, we're products of our environment, right? And and because we're in America, we have the most diverse Muslim population on the planet lives here, right? And we're also heavily socialized with other faiths and non-faiths. And so it's easy. You can even talk about tolerance or talk about there's no compulsion, all the things in Islam that I talk about, right about. But the challenge is that when you're in an environment where it's homogeneous, where you're just stuck with a community, where and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but you're in the UAE, or you're in Iraq, or you're somewhere, and you're surrounded by Muslims and the same Muslims. It's very, very difficult. It's easy to say that we're accepting of all the diversity, but then if once you get into it, you immediately have these human responses, right? You're scared of the other, you're suspicious of the other, you're all those things. And we have, in America, one of the things that I'm very passionate about is that take that leadership role. When I was at the American Islamic Congress, it's like we need to be tip of the spear when it comes to international religious freedom, because we are different here. We've been heavily socialized. We can tell people, look, you know what I mean? Like I'm stuck here. I'm Ishmaeli. There's no Jamaat Kona here in Kingston. There's no Jamaat Kona. There's one in New York, and then there's nothing in Albany. And if I go to the Imam Barga, if I go to the mosque in Albany, those are Shia 12ers. That's like raging Pakistanis, right? So like so like first of all, like I walk in, I'm Roshni, I'm glowing, right? I'm white. So I walk in and right away there everybody gets nervous. You're FBI, you're this, you're that, you're stuff. So that's number one. Number two is that now they know me there and everything's fine, but there's the ritual that they have, the so you go to the masala and they're they're people crying right off the bat, and I'm like, we're not even near anything. And they're like, well, I'm crying about Hussein or Hazrat Ali or whatever, like it happened yesterday, and so, and you want to be sensitive and to what comforts them, which is fine, but it's so different than what, like I said, as an Ishmaeli, like I said, we're not only Islam after hours, we're very sort of like, we're I always tell people, what am I doing right now? And people go, I don't know. I go, I'm looking forward. I'm not looking backwards. So, it's a little bit of a goof, but the fact is that, we believe in the stateless state. We believe in good works. So, go to Pakistan, you go all over Africa, the hospitals, the schools are all part of the Aga Khan network. It's something that,
And John, I'm assuming you're Ishmaeli because you were born Ishmaeli.
yeah, but it's a little bit crazy. So yeah, and I don't know, maybe we've never talked about this, but maybe it's a good time to talk about it. So um yeah, my parents, so I was raised by my grandparents, my great grandparents. So my great grandparents came from Afghanistan. So they died when I was 10. So that's how I have one foot in the old world, one foot in this world. So my first language was Indo-Greek. So I was just like, trying to figure out what was going on. But I grew up in a very sort of different environment than my sister, who grew up with my parents. And my family came here by way of Italy. So when they all stopped in Sicily and stayed there for my great grandfather stayed there for so when Amir, do you know the story? Did I ever remember?
No, no, this is fascinating.
So when Amir Rahman invaded a place called Kafiristan, that's what the outsiders called it. The insiders called it Kamdesh, the land of the clouds. He wanted to forcibly convert the Kafirs to Islam and to Sunni Islam, right? And so so he marched out of Kabul, and my great grandfather was one of six brothers, and he had five sisters, and my double great grandmother took the oldest and youngest and left. So all the men went out into the battlefield. They took their medicine, and obviously it's not known as Kamdesh and not known as Kafiristan. It's known as Nuristan.
Current day Afghanistan?
What's that?
Is it current day Afghanistan?
It's now known as Nuristan, the land of light. That's the province. And so I'm, if I were going to say I'm Nuristani, that's why the name is Pinna. It's Pana, but it was Latinized to Pinna when we went to Italy. So it took the oldest and youngest brother and migrated all the way through to the Middle East, and then from there went to Sicily. That's why when I saw Baba Mansour, remember when we saw Baba Mansour in Israel. Remember remember we saw the Druze guy. It
I
was
remember that. Yeah, we went to his home for
right.
yeah.
That's why I don't know if you saw like me spend a little time with him. It was a very emotional because his father was a young boy when his grandfather stewarded my great grandmother across the Middle East and got her on a boat. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was pretty crazy. So yeah, I don't know if I have it on me. I don't know. I don't. So so went to Sicily. And then the mother went a little bit crazy. My great grandfather's mother went a little bit crazy. She and the boys, two boys ended up. She got them safe, and then the two boys ended up in a orphanage.
Oh man.
And then so my great grandfather fought in the Italian army on the Austrian front as a medic. And when the fascista took over, he left and came to America. And my great grand and his brother stayed. In so that's why there's an Italian connection. And the name was Latinized from Pana, which means like a guy who's good luck, to Pinna. And he died when I was 10. So I knew my great grandfather. And um, so in any event, so that's why I like one foot in the old world, one foot in the new world, right? So it's like this weird, this sort of weird kind of thing. I was always tell a story uh, of when I was cultural competency, right? I tell two stories about cultural competency, and one is when I was low level staff at the Putin or not Putin, the Yeltsin Clinton summit. I was really young, but I spoke Russian. I was going to Marist at the time, Marist College, and so they pulled anybody who was a Russian speaker. And I was working at the FDR Presidential Library, which is where the summit was being housed in '95. So here I am, low level staff, and Russian was the language that my mother and I spoke, so my father and sister wouldn't know what we were talking about. So yes, I thought this was really kind of funny. And so we're sitting there at the table, and the Russians are saying, "God, this food is so good. Who made it?" And one of the protocol officers from the Department of State was just it's just really funny because he's a protocol officer, right? So he's supposed to be schooled at not making faux pas and not making these sort of like terrible statements and being very culturally sensitive. And so he goes, "Oh, the CIA made that." And so this all comes from the CIA. And so the Russians spit out the food because the Central Intelligence Agency. So they spit out the food, and so I stepped in and I go, "Нет, they not no, that's not it, you know." And it came from the Culinary Institute of America, but locally they call it the CIA.
So funny.
And so it's like, it's this weird, so that's like a political, like cultural competency sort of thing, But when I was younger, I was when I was so that's sort of like cultural competency that I was like a lesson that allowed me to kind of put that in my head and think about, I don't know what, there's something here when it comes to cultural competency. How you say things and how you depict things is really important. Maybe I didn't say it then, but I kind of said maybe I can make it my career out of myself, a career out of this. But the story that I always tell about cultural competency with not necessarily Islam, but more from a cultural background. So great grandpa comes from the old country, right? Comes from Afghanistan, and so I was coming back from preschool, and we had made peanut butter that day, and then learned parables like stories. And so my great grandfather, I come home, and my great grandmother, she was in a wheelchair, she was like wheeling herself around, and they would all kind of gather around me and ask, what did you learn, and so I said, oh, we learned stories. And well, what stories did you learn, and John, oh, dear John, and they'd say, well, and the only one that came to mind was this poor guy. He's alone. He's got to watch these sheep, and he gets lonely, so he cries wolf, and the villagers come and they say he's a great guy because he's being vigilant. Of course, I wasn't this articulate back then, but and then again he calls cries wolf, and he gets lonely the next night and the next night, and it keeps going on and on and on until finally he cries wolf, and the nobody comes and the wolf eats everybody, you know. And so I remember my grandfather saying, well, what do you mean? Why did they tell you that story? And I go, well, it's a moral. It's you're not supposed to lie. And I remember my great grandfather looking at my grandfather, like him in the face, and he got right on the phone. So I don't know, you're a young guy, so I don't know if you remember like old dial phones where there was used to be like a wooden thing with little slats where you put pads, and then you take the phone off and you dial the phone, and then the slats were like the numbers of people. So it'd be like a pad with all like A to Z of like all the numbers of people. So he like flipped through and got the name of the number of the teacher, and he called her right away. And they got in this big sort of argument about like, what are you teaching my grandson and what's going on? And so my and she was going, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, you're teaching my grandson, you're not teaching him properly about morals and values and ethics and rules. And she goes, well, what is the moral of the story? And he says, well, you don't tell the same lie twice. And so it's a it
Wow.
it was one of those moments that sort of sticks with you, because what a different cultural perspective. And it's not wrong in the sense that, you know, maybe the guy should have said he was cold one night and needed something. I don't know.
Wow.
But that's an example of, I think, a good cultural comes. They come from a culture where there's a different perspective of looking at how to interact with your environment, and so I just remember from that moment on, I kind of kept that in the back of my head, and I think that when you're first generation, it's different. It's difficult because you are a diaspora, right? So you're like frozen in time. So like have you been back to Pakistan since you've left?
Only once.
Okay, but so essentially, your knowledge of Pakistan is frozen from when you were four. Like you have that memory. And so like my great grandfather, his perspective of Afghanistan was when after he had left when he was a young boy, and so it's like when I learned Indo-Greek, it's like this old style. It's like an old English style. When I go back to Afghanistan, I speak. They're like you're speaking like an old man. And the Taliban came up to me in Herat, and we were chatting back and forth. They go, well, this guy's an American spy, and he goes, no, he's a country bumpkin. And they go, he's north of the Kunar Valley. And I said, okay. And he goes, well, what do you mean by that? And I go, so I said, well, he goes, well, I got a Nuristani here. And he brought this Nuristani out, and he starts talking to me, and I start talking to him a little bit. And he goes, God, this guy, I'll be honest with you, like he must have just left this valley, because my verbiage is frozen in time from 1890. You know what I mean? Like from what my great grandfather taught me. I was like, I don't even know the word for that. Like and so it was really funny. We were trying to chatting a little bit about how, and then the guy circles back to me. How are you able to function speaking this way? He goes, I go, well, my Dari is a little bit off, my Pashto is a little bit off, but I kind of muddle through. And so, but in any event, I think that the challenge is that you get a generation that's frozen in time, that's stuck, and their only memories are from when they left in that moment. And then, it's like the revolution in Iran happened in 79. All those people that left see Iran from 1979. They haven't seen what's happened in the 80s and the 90s up to now. And so they want to restore the Shah, and which may or may not be a good idea, but their whole idea is frozen in time. So, but I think that we don't know what Islam is going to become. There's a struggle between the old and the new, and I think that story about my great grandfather and perspective comes to bear a lot in how we interact with the community. You know, uh, would you say the same thing, or would it's like,
I think true. I think it's fascinating to think about what the new Islam will be, what the new face of Islam will be in the West. And I think if we focus on teaching the youth about principles and morals and values, I think would be much better off for it. I grew up, I think, similar to how a lot of people grow up, where it was about learning the Quran, like learning how to read the Quran, and then it's just a memory game. It's how much of this can you memorize? And
yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of Sunday school was just how much have you memorized?
Yeah.
I think we're gonna, and I'm sure there's a ton of virtue to that. I think there's gonna be a shift though. I think
Yeah.
it's gonna be a shift where it's, hey, let's focus on the teachings of Islam, not necessarily how well you can memorize Arabic,
Yeah.
how perfect your tajweed is, and more so on not even understanding what you're saying, understanding the meaning or the lesson in what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I think that I think it's like I said, there's a lot of different. There's a comfort in going in understanding the motions, and there's a comfort in understanding the fundamentals. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's Catholics that go to church, and priest says something, they say it back, they get up, they get down, they're on the knee, all that business, and so I think that and I'll give you this is a great example. I mean, my family, my the Lutherans and the Catholics help my family out a lot. So my mother and my father are Catholic. They're not Muslim. So my sister is Hindu. She's decided after 9/11, she was like, eh. So yes, I mean, she worships Kali. We're not doing the math on that. We're not really sure if she's, Kali was the god in Temple of Doom, so we're not really sure. We don't
Yeah.
we're not asking any questions, So, but the thing is like so. But I grew up with my great grandparents, and then in my grandparents' house, I was raised, and so I had this bridge, this gap. So I know a lot about Catholicism. My parents were like, "Well, why don't you give this a shot for a little bit?" And then so I did. I went to it was like middle school, and I spent a summer going to CCD, I think it was called. I don't know what it's called. And I lasted about 2 weeks before I threw myself down the stairs because I was like I literally I was like I can't I don't know what's going on here. Like there was a lot of shenanigans. But and it just wasn't my circus, wasn't my monkeys. Anybody, I'm a religious freedom guy, so I don't care what you believe, what you don't believe, and if you're changing and choosing. But I had already committed to go through JAST, the levels of sort of attainment in Ishmaelism. So I had gone through like these different levels of attainment to become a man, and I was already sort of committed to that. But I think that we're lucky. It's lucky that I had that sort of lineage. But in the same respect, even within the Ismaili community, it's dominated by the Pakistanis, right? So there's a huge Pakistani institutional Asian community. I come from a small group from Afghanistan, from
And do you
Afghanistan.
see that? Do you see how much of the way that religion is practiced, how much of it is just Pakistani culture? Because
You,
even Pakistani weddings, right? Like you would think, even Pakistani religious weddings carry a lot of Hindu.
oh
ri-
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you got to be careful. We can't say Indian. We can't, the Indian elements in Pakistan because but I think like I went to the Jamaat Khan. I went to the JK in God in Falls Church, it's in a it's like they're like bunkered in like they're under siege, and so they're in like a strip mall behind the strip mall. It's like this secret. And when I went in, they were all Pakistanis, and they were immediately like they're suspicious and all kinds of other stuff. And I'm going, like my grandfather would always say this: our lineage is ancient and indisputable. He would say with his finger up in the air, And so here you can imagine I'm dealing with a bunch of Pakistanis who are saying, well, this is our house and this is what's going on. And there was a lot of cultural elements that were really difficult to kind of understand, and then to get over that hump where they would accept who I am within this tiny, tiny little sect where everybody knows everybody. It was difficult. I think there is an issue with culture, and there's also an issue with dominance of like radical elements or political Islam that's well funded influences everything, because the top NGOs, I always say the top NGOs from as of like 2000 were that represented Islam were all their origins were all Muslim Brotherhood. That's open source. So your ISNA, CARE, ICNA, all those guys. Now it's so diverse. We have Muslims for Progressive Values. We've got all kinds of other organizations out there, who that where it's very, very diverse. And I think that civil building of civil society is really important. You know, And so where you could be a Muslim that cares about, you know, climate change, and you're going to go to Muslims for Progressive Values, right? You're going to go in, you're going to care about if you're if you're a Muslim that wants to be, you know, deal with the fundamentals, you're going to go to the Muslim Student Association. You're going to go to ISNA, and you're going to go there. I think there's a lot more diversity now in Muslim organizations. There's, Muslims for philanthropy, which is like, they're funding different agenda items, right? There's like I said, my organization, I spent 10 years engaging the Ummah to make sure that all the sects wouldn't go to war with me. That was a huge thing, talking with Usmani and talking with Sheikh bin Baya and all these guys. Because I'm like, listen, I'm executing the Aman message. That's what I'm doing. I'm operationalizing it. You guys all signed on to it. So I got your fatwa. So I really don't have to do this. But are you guys is this gonna, and it was tense for a while. And they go like, well, why are you going to do this? We already have organizations that represent this. And I'm like, not really, not really. You know what I mean? So I was like, let me do my thing. I'm just one
Yeah,
guy.
and I think much more could be done. I'm honored that you asked me to be on the board. I'm excited to do good work with you.
Yeah, no, I think that there's, scholarship needs to be open up to, can't just be religious scholars. It has to be open up to practitioners. It has to be open up to professionals. It has to be open up to students and who want to speculate. What do we do? Have you ever seen a dais with more than one Muslim on it? No. You want to have four Muslims, two Muslims discussing like you and I are doing right now. We're talking about the status of Islam, right? What's the future of Islam? And we're at this point where we come from two different sects. You're Sunni, I'm Shia, right? And I'm, like I said, an off-brand, sect. But the fact is that we do business together. The fact is that we're um, building a life together. We interact on a lot of different things. I mean, I have my businesses, and you and I just before the phone call, we're talking about some business stuff that we're going to do. And the fact is that we're you're really the next generation. I'm kind of over the hill, but the fact is that I think there needs to be. I'm excited to be in that bridge between the old world and the new world. And that's always kind of been my role. But I
I
think
think
that there.
a
What's that?
really there's so many cool aspects to Islam that are worth passing down to the next generation the way you've learned it, including, and I'm really fascinated by the ring that you're wearing. You gave me a ring one time. Is it a similar stone? And
Well, okay, so
talk to
so
us the
you
experience.
know the ring I gave you is a special ring, and so the reason why it's special is the orientation of the ring. It's it's like an eye. It's not it spans. So there's this ring, right? So there's this guy, right?
Right.
It's yellow because this is my grandfather, so I wear it, because my grandfather was big was these yellow stones. This one, all right. So this one I made, and I wear it like this because it's so big. But this is like your ring. See, it spans the cross. This is
Right.
it's a tourmaline from the Paco mine in Afghanistan. And so I designed the ring. I'll have to send you a picture of it. Next time we're together. So I designed it. There's no embellishments. It's just got these little cuts in it, so you can get what's it called. And then tourmaline is green, but you can see it's embedded in crystal. So that's straight from the mine. So I'm there doing my national security stuff, trying to figure out what's going on. And of course, it's Taliban controlled, the Pakol mine. And I was there, and I was saying, like, this guy's an American, he's this and that, he's working. And I said, look, here's the deal. I'm I'm my family's from this region, and it would just be fantastic if you guys could just put the shenanigans away for a little while, and we could just eat something, and maybe you guys could be good hosts and steward me appropriately. And so you want to know what he did? I'm not going to do the math on what and who because there's a lot of forced labor and all kinds of other stuff. But he went down and he got the stone and gave it to me, and it's very meaningful because it's from the earth of the place where my great grandfather was forced to leave.
Yeah.
And so I made a ring out of it, and I kind of hold on to it. But when you admired that ring that I was wearing, like that's to me it's very Islamic. It's like
I still
Take
have that ring.
take
Yeah, I
it.
wear
It's
it for
yours, you know. And I know you don't wear the ring so much or whatever it is, but you know, that's a bond that you and I share. It's as you know, it's sitting there radiating hopefully, you know, wonderful, good, positive things, and maybe a lot of maybe it's a bad influence. Maybe it's the thing that talks in the middle of the night.
No,
It's
I
like,
remember you telling me there's a significance for the orientation of the stone. You know,
yeah,
how it's laid out as an eye versus laid out vertically.
well, that's the thing. It's like this is how everything is. You know, the stone is like this, and I'm not going to go down the road of like where we get into like we're just two dudes talking about crystals, and you know, like I think that's treacherous. But the fact is that you know, we're it's spanning the ring and it's spanning the finger to the other two fingers, which is an extension of the idea of sharing a life and sharing a friendship, right? And the bond between men, you know, is unique. And so the idea that we, you know, I don't want people to interpret this. Gave you a ring, gave Momin a ring, didn't ask him to marry me. We weren't dating, didn't
He
happen.
was
That's
not
not what this is
wondering.
about.
It,
But it is something that is a bond between us, right? And I think that our relationship started off with that we were traveling to Israel as guests of the government to as a Muslim delegation, and then when we came back, you know, we kind of went to our respective corners and you know with our lives and girlfriends and stuff, and we've always kept in contact, and it's led us to where we are now, where we do business together on multiple levels. We do philanthropic work together, and then on top of that, we're you know sitting on a podcast talking about being cultural Muslims. But I think it's important for our listenership. It's like what you know when you decided to uh, you know, when it comes to your professional life and who you are, you're a very successful business person, an entrepreneur. You know, we share that quality. I think that I mean, it's important for, I think, our listenership to understand, you know, what you've done with yourself and how you translate sort of faith in action. If it's not the fundamentals, well, what is it? And you, because you have a philanthropic charity, you have a business, and then you interact with your community, you know, performing good works on a regular basis. So maybe talk a little bit about that. I think it'd be important. You know, that's something that
yeah,
you and I both share. You had a PR firm, right?
I'm sorry.
You had a PR firm.
When we met, yeah, I had a creative agency. Yeah, it's been that's how long it's been. Wow. Yeah, since sold that, I had a creative agency. I sold that. Now I mainly focus on real estate development. I have an edtech company, Open Education, which is geared towards helping high school students get into college and open missions. And then I have a nonprofit in the city called Friends for Good. We've been doing it for about 6 years now. I have another the focus is really engaging young professionals in philanthropic work. So I curate monthly volunteer events around the city, partnering with other nonprofits. I have another nonprofit. So we'll put a little pause on it until we wrap it back up, called Down North Treehouse, which is we're taking an abandoned library that the city's giving us, and we're turning it into a youth development center. It's a coding camp for kids who can't go to college. I sit on a number of boards. I say that I think that a lot of who I am, and I don't talk a lot about my charity work. There's still a lot of things I do, a lot of people I sponsor that I never talk about. It comes from Islam. Like the basis of it was my upbringing and my parents, you know, drilling it into me how important charity is.
Right.
And I think that's the part of Islam that I loved. And that's the part of Islam that I think we should continue to teach kids today, right? Because regardless of whether how great your tajweed is, or, you know, whether you wake up for Fajr, it's your actions. So I'd like to believe, and I hope that, you know, on the day of judgment, you know, and not to say that I don't pray. I do pray. I pray in Jamaat with my parents every weekend as well.
Right.
I hope that we're judged on those actions, and I want more young people to know that. I want more young people to know, hey, because you don't practice Islam the way your parents or your grandparents did, mainly in other countries, you could still be a very proud Muslim. You could still do things in the name of Islam, um, that are that are maybe your way of doing it.
Yeah, like faith in action is different, I think, for everyone. Like that's the
Yeah.
difference. And then,
And I think that carries on into business as well, right? If you have an opportunity to get one over on someone and you don't, and whether you call it karma or the universe, it really is a foundation of religion. Like, hey man, the way I was raised and what I believe in today, there's a God that exists. There will be judgment on your actions. So even if no one's watching, even if I could get away with sneaking in this provision into the deal, which works out to my benefit, I'm not going to do it because it's not the right thing to do.
well,
The
you also got to look at
foundation is
yourself in
not.
the mirror at night. You got to look at yourself in the mirror at night.
Yeah,
And
and I think Islam has a lot to do with that, right? Like, I think if kids, and everyone's different, if I maybe grew up without having religion, without having Islam, I don't know how much I would do that, right? I don't know how much I would have an opportunity to do something that is immoral, knowing I could get away with it and do it or not do it, right? But I think if you grow up with this foundation of like, hey, there is right and wrong, there's morality. A lot of people need religion to learn morality. I think some people get to morality on their own just through, the hard knocks of life. I think that's the foundation in which people should approach business. And that's how I've always done something. I've always been, I've had success never because I was the smartest person in the room. It's always because people liked me enough to give me a chance and, liked me enough to be a vendor or, invest in an idea I have. And they'll state your character. And I think a lot of my character personally was developed through Islam. I always say, the one thing I look for people, the trait I look for the most in people is character, whether it's someone I'm going to be friends with or do business with. If I don't believe they have great character, not just good character, great character, I kind of want nothing to do with them. There's not enough money I can make. There's no business venture I need to be a part of. There's no one entertaining enough where I'd want to spend time with them if I don't believe they have great character. So I have the opportunity to mentor, a handful of half a dozen. I call them kids, and I've had them since they were teenagers. Now they're all in their, or most of them are in their early 20s. I preach that to them as well. It's develop good character and focus on building relationships with other people with good character.
yeah,
I attribute it personally to Islam. Whether they attribute it to their own religion or just life, I think that's something we need to impress more upon the youth, and not necessarily, hey man, like, did you pray 5 times a day and did you pronounce everything perfectly? I would like to see more youth focused on developing good character and having good morals and having good manners. Uh, and
and
I think
serving something larger than themselves. That's an
yeah,
important
yeah, and
element.
I
You
think
know,
that translates into everything you do. I think your financial success will depend could depend greatly on that. You know, people you'll have to interact with people, you have to work with people, you have to do business with people. You want people that want to do business with you. You
yeah,
want people when there's an opportunity, when there's a deal, when there's 10 acres of land being sold. You want to be the guy that people call because I like doing business with you, because you're going
yeah,
to be fair, you're going to treat them well, and you could just be fair and treat them well because that's who you are. And I
yeah,
needed, Islam to help me get there.
yeah. No, I think that's, I think that's the message that we kind of should leave on. It's the idea is that, it's difficult because, will I usually when we do this, when I do the podcast, we chat back and forth. I get all these sort of hits and they go, this is haram or this is that or so and so. The fact is that if you're not, we don't focus on good works enough. We don't focus on charity enough. Everybody says, well, if you give your zakat, you're good. And it goes into this nebulous place. But it's not just a donation. It's a mindset, and there's an idea about it that's supposed to make you act. And I think that makes all the difference. And it's somebody, we're both in business, and so we spend a lot of time being very judicious on how we structure a deal, right? So it's like we were talking about before this, and you were like, ah, well, I just don't worry about me on this deal, da da da. And I was like, everyone always makes the same amount. We all split things equally, right? That's I said I've never done a deal that doesn't happen. And so and I think that makes a difference. That's why people do want to do business with, you or me or whatever it is that we have an idea behind it that's not it's something that's enforceable by our ethics and rules and our personhood and who we are. And I think a lot of that is, and I write a lot about dignity and the idea that we're extending dignity to everyone, and is a really important factor within Islam that I don't want to say is overlooked, but it's not focused on. The fundamentals are always focused on, and you get hammered by that, and you feel uncomfortable. You know, it's a little bit of a it's tough because sometimes you're just trying to be part of the community, or you're just trying to get a little comfort, or you're just trying to be anonymous, in the masala. You know what I mean? Like you're just trying, you just want to sit and you just want to pray around, and without some shenanigans, somebody coming over but I think that your success is a tribute to your faith in action, and being a cultural Muslim is still being faithful, and sometimes that's enough. If you don't feel like it's enough, then pop in the Juma prayer or do this or do that, and it's okay.
Yeah,
You know,
totally.
we're giving everybody permission on that one. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and I think it's very meaningful for you to, share your faith journey, share, your ideas and thoughts, and then we can, I hope that I didn't obfuscate any of the truths about me. I'm happy to chat as much as or as little as you want about my family background and what's going on with me. Maybe we do a second show on that where you hammer me, um, and then go from there. But I appreciate you taking the time.
For dinner, man. I think we're overdue for a nice sit down meal.
We are long overdue for that, so, but I appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you having me on, my brother.
All right. So long, my friend.